Hi, and welcome to the Real Estate Nerds Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Royal Smith, and today I am pleased to be able to interview Sam Glover, and he is the lawyerist. This guy is committed into being able to help a profession in an industry that I think is ripe for change. And a lot of that change is what we're doing here with Royal Legal Solutions, and it's great to have a brother in arm like Sam into how do we actually change something for the better and bring the dinosaur back into the modern age. So today, guys, we're not going to be talking about real estate per se, but this is going to be a really exciting episode. If you're really interested to see what does early stage of change of an industry actually look like. So Sam's over here. You can see his awesome skateboard in the back. If you guys are looking at YouTube, if you're looking at my video feed, I actually have Franny, my Labradoodle, here in the office today that I get to write off because she's actually a mascot of Royal Legal Solutions. So now it's a tax write-off. And if you're interested in strategies like that, I'm posting that kind of stuff up all the time on Royal Legal Solutions if you guys are interested in that. So Sam, tell us a little bit about you and just kind of set the stage, like what do we need to know about you and your journey and getting to, what it is you're doing right now.
Yeah, I'll give you the quick and dirty version, and you can ask more about anything you're interested in hearing more about. So I was a practicing lawyer for about 10 years. I started out working for a criminal defense firm, went to another criminal defense firm, and then I worked for an insurance defense firm for about a year, and didn't work out great. So I kind of applied for jobs I didn't want for a while before I started my own practice. And anyone who's encountered me on Lawyerist, on the podcast, whatever, kind of knows that I automatically am anti-status quo. And so I tried to do that when I started my law practice too. I had my own ideas about how I wanted to do things. And I ran that practice for, I think, about 8 years before I ended up selling it. Along the way, I made a lot of changes to the way I did things. I learned a ton, did a lot of good work. But I'd also found an outlet in online blogging. I needed to write about technology and innovation and law practice based on what I was learning and what I felt like I was discovering. And that writing eventually turned into what is now Lawyerist. And Lawyerist has grown up from Sam's ranty blog about bad legal technology to become what we think is the largest community of solo and small firm lawyers online. And what we're trying to do there is help foster and coach and consult with a community who is really trying to do law differently, to throw the traditional practice model in the trash, except where it makes the most sense, and really find more client-centered, client-friendly ways to do things. And so we work with our lab community to do that. We have a large, huge free community of insiders, and we're just trying to reshape what it looks like to practice law and work with lawyers. So,
why would it be important for somebody to work with a lawyer that's engaged in the type of process that you guys are doing?
I think when you work with a lawyer who is building a client-centered firm, whether it's a lawyer, I mean, that's what lawyers who are in the lab are doing. But we're obviously not the only ones. But lawyers who are really focused on client-centered practices are just going to be easier to work with. I think when you contrast the traditional law practice model of billing only by the hour, billing, come into my office and sit there while I make you wait in my waiting room, and then, you have to pay for parking, and then I'm going to talk down to you for 30 minutes and bill you for 45 and send you home. Like that just sort of traditional attorney-client relationship kind of sucks. And so I think if you just throw that out and you try and think about, okay, so I have my clients, my customers are people who need to get things done, who need to solve problems, who need to deal with business issues, personal issues, family, whatever, that involve lawyers and courts, or contracts or whatever, right? You have something that you need a lawyer to get done. It doesn't mean that you need to that you necessarily need to meet with a lawyer. It means that you need the legal work done. You need the output of it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be paying somebody $300-400 an hour to do it. It doesn't necessarily mean, although it could mean this, it doesn't necessarily mean any of those things. We kind of, those of us who started law practices are often taught by people who've gone before us to do things in a very traditional way. And it turns out that for a number of reasons, that's bad for lawyers, bad for clients. And I think what people see who approach a lawyer who is trying to build a client-centered practice is you're just going to see more convenience. You're going to see somebody who wants to work with you in the way that you want to work, who's going to offer you options for billing arrangements, for meeting times, for communications, and who's willing to kind of think outside the box about how to go about solving your problem when there are multiple ways to solve a problem that don't just involve working your ass off, billing by the hour to get to the result.
And do you find that that really typically changes the incentive structures inside of like the business partnership between a lawyer and somebody else when it's like, here's an objective, here's a
Mm-hmm.
price versus, hey, well, if it's billable hour, then really your
Yeah.
incentives are to bill me as much as you possibly can until I really complain about it.
I mean, it should, right? There's this weird thing in law where we go to school for 3 years learning to solve legal problems, but then we don't use that problem solving approach to anything else, And like when a client brings you, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, and here's my budget for doing it. Help me figure out what are my options within that, those requirements. Um, if you take that same legal problem solving brain and then shift it over to like not if you get out of your head of there is one way to solve legal problems and I know how to do it, and you start trying to figure out like what can I get for this client for the amount that they have budgeted for it, you can probably come up with a lot of interesting things. Lawyers are really smart, creative people, but we just have kind of like tunnel vision for how to solve legal problems. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of awesome potential there. I was having lunch a while back with a friend who works for a major corporation in Minneapolis, and I was telling her about a law firm up in Canada that does tax controversies. Countertax is the name of the firm, and they do a lot of work around trying to provide those kinds of predictions and estimates for their clients, so that they can have smarter conversations about what will this cost and what are your likely outcomes for what it costs. So they ended up, now they have an actual piece of software. They wound up developing their own software so that they could, it started out on spreadsheets and scratch paper, and now it's an actual piece of software where you can pull levers and figure out like, well, what if we decide to drop this claim? What will be the impact on our likelihood of prevailing on the merits or getting a favorable settlement or whatever? And so I'm having lunch with this friend from a Minneapolis corporation, and she's just like, God, I wish I could be having those kinds of conversations with my outside counsel. All they do is focus on, getting through discovery and summary judgment and billing me as much as possible. And then we'll talk about settlement, whereas Countertax is trying to figure out like, what within your budget, what levers can we pull, what variables can we adjust to try and get you the best probability of getting an outcome you're going to be happy with. And that's just transformative. And it's not just business, right? It's about, it absolutely applies in business and real estate, but it also applies in divorces and personal injury cases and all kinds of things. What is the outcome that you need, whether you're the plaintiff or the defendant, or whether it's in court or not? That's always the case. Everybody has what they hope to pay, what they're willing to pay, and what they'd be willing to accept for it. And if you have that conversation, totally different, changes everything.
Do you see that the future of law practices changing significantly here in the future as a broad scale to the model in line with that kind of like objective based because
Yeah.
it's really kind of talking about like as law as a product, right? Like here's an objective that I need to meet. It's a quantifiable price, right? Instead of like this just generalized service.
I mean, I think there's absolutely a portion of legal work that doesn't need the kind of attention, the kind of custom work that we do, right? Like there's absolutely some subset of legal work, and maybe it's 1% of legal work, maybe it's 50%, but if you can program a computer to do it, then no lawyer has any business charging you to do it, right? Yeah. Like you can charge for the access to the system, you can charge for the software, whatever, but if you can program a computer, you shouldn't be paying a lawyer. And so there's some portion of legal work that will go that way. Much more legal work is more in the nature of like if creative work, right? Like we are solving problems in the way that a user interface designer or a product designer solves problems. And I think, and there's a lot of that can't be outsourced, not effectively, right? Like, can you imagine programming a computer to design the iPhone? The most advanced, wealthiest computer technology company in the world doesn't do that. They have designers who design things. it's really hard for me to imagine us getting completely away from having human input. But my friend Ed Walters at Fastcase really loves to talk about that the magic happens when you actually have the interface between computers and humans, right? So like, and I think counterattacks is a great example of that. But here, let me give you another couple. Like, well, you know, the backdrop for this is we all know about Deep Blue, right? Deep Blue is the chess champ. It beat Garry Kasparov, right? But if you have Garry Kasparov and Deep Blue working together, they're completely unbeatable. There's no computer or human that can beat them together. And that's because Deep Blue can help Garry Kasparov see all of the potential, and then he can form the strategy with the creativity that a computer can't bring to it. And I think lawyers are the same way. Like, imagine if you didn't have to do your legal research or your research into what previous properties have gone for. Imagine if you could just plug in and get some information, some data about that, right? You're going in front of a judge and you want to know, how does this judge usually decide on this issue in a case like mine? Or you're trying to negotiate with a party and you're trying to figure out, of all the public contracts that they've negotiated, what kinds of terms do they normally settle on? That's just data. You can get that data, but we don't bother in it right now. We just use our intuition, which is totally flawed, but it's the best we've got. So me making decisions with the best information possible is going to be a whole lot more powerful than me making decisions based on my gut. And like, when I think about this, I used to be, you know, I was a litigator. And so my clients would always ask me, like, how much is this going to settle for? I don't know. Like, I definitely have a lot of experience and I have a hunch, but I don't have any data, right? I'm just using or I think a lot of like, you know, in litigation, you talk about your risk, right? I think you've got a 75% chance of recovering $100,000 and a 50% chance of getting $1 million. That's not based on anything. We just think that's right from our experience and our hunch and our guesses. But you can actually answer that question. You can put real numbers on that. And that's what I think that lawyers can start doing now that has really been impossible before. And that's what I want to see, stuff like that, you know, because that's cool. It's cool, you know, from a technology standpoint and from a data standpoint and information standpoint, but also just like, if you're a client, why wouldn't you want that? Of course you want that. You don't want the most experienced lawyer. You want the most experienced lawyer with the best information.
Yeah. So. I've also seen too, is that like law firms are trying to get more into like tech-based things, like, all right, actually using CRMs and actually, you know, having to learn like all the skill sets that actually our other businesses have had to do, because they didn't have like this ivory tower of secret knowledge that nobody else could have access to.
Yep.
Right? And to be able to be competitive. And I was wondering if you would share with us a little bit about like, from the perspective of saying like a potential client, you know, maybe somebody listening to this podcast, like, hey, I wonder like what types of attorneys like really have it together. Like, how are they running their practices? How would I vet somebody that might not just be like the best legal mind, but I could probably see like, how do they run their business, or how do they do their things that would show me that they're actually really great at what they do?
I think some of the indicators that you're going to see are right on the front page of most law firms' websites. You know, I think this is an art, not a science, right? But I feel like you can look at most websites, and if the website hasn't been updated in 10 years, it's probably a company that doesn't place a lot of importance on being up to date.
Yeah.
And the website is, of course, the replacement for the handshake, right? It is the first impression. Your search results in your website are the first impression you have on most people, right? Because even if I get a personal recommendation from somebody at coffee, the next thing I do is pull up your website on my phone. And so if they're not placing that care into the very first bit of client service that they do, that's the very first client interaction that they're going to have with you as their client. If they're not putting any care into that, they're probably not going to put much care into the rest. And so I would say the website is probably an okay proxy for, is this an empathetic, client-centered firm? And some other things, I mean, obviously you want to look for something that's up to date. I would look for a range of communication options. You know, a law firm that doesn't have a contact form, doesn't have email addresses, doesn't appear to be inviting any kind of online communication is probably not super open to anything but letters and phone calls, which is okay if that's what you want, but it's never what I want. right? I want my contractors and my lawyer and whatever. I want a text, like I don't want to be on the phone with you. And so, and that doesn't have to be everyone, but good law firms will offer a range of choices so that they can communicate with people in the way they prefer to be communicated with. If you submit that online form and they call you back, then I think that also rubs me the wrong way, right? I told you I wanted to communicate online, and you decided to switch the media and switch to the phone, which I think is actually kind of inconsiderate. Unless your form has asked me, is it okay if I call you back? And I check yes, then great. But so I think that communication piece is one of the most client-centered things that a firm can do. And so you'll get some indications of that from the website. There's also just some basic respect that if the website is popping up flashing things and auto playing music and video and stuff at you, then I think you can expect a lawyer who's going to talk over you and things too. So I think the website you can use as a proxy for what the engagement is going to go like. And so, yeah. But then when you meet with the lawyer too, I think you're going to get an instant feel for it. And I think a lawyer who is actually trying to practice in a client-centered way is not going to be impatient, right? Is going to greet you and listen to you and want to hear your story and be good at listening, and taking the time. I think what you mentioned it earlier, and I think we talked about it a little bit, or I talked about it. I probably just went on about it, but one of the things to look for is, does your lawyer seem interested in figuring out what kind of an outcome you're interested in? Like what are you hoping to happen here? Or are they only interested in assessing the merits of the legal issue? Because that's what lawyers do, right? We solve legal issues. But the reality, like I remember I had a client once who was dealing with, I think it was an eviction matter or a repair issue with their property. And my client was the tenant. And it became clear to me at some point that the outcome my client needed was not money. He needed a check, but he needed a check because his landlord was very handsome and buff, and he had an attractive wife, and he thought the landlord had been hitting on his wife, and he was kind of a nerdy guy, and he needed to feel like he was kicking sand in the bully's face, and that's what he needed. He didn't need $10,000. He needed $1 on a check that signaled that he won. And so once I had reached that intuition, I realized, okay, like, we have a range of solutions here that aren't just, can we get money? And then I helped my client understand what the range of solutions were based on that. And so, like, a good client who cares, or a good lawyer who cares, is going to try and figure out what is it that you need, even if maybe you haven't quite figured it out yet. My client wasn't thinking about it in these terms, but in the way that he talked about his interactions with the landlord, it gradually became clear. So, I think looking out for just the manner in which your lawyer talks to you and asks questions and explores it. If they just kind of shut you up and try to ask about the elements of your legal claim, then they're a pretty traditional lawyer, and they're probably not going to take a lot of care of you.
And do you see that different too with like how lawyers use like CRMs and like different case management as being like indicative of like a question of saying like, hey, well,
yeah,
people that are using more robust structures and using more technology are probably going to be more on top of like, how are we going to get to particular outcomes? Because they're not just thinking about legal, or thinking
right.
about all the other pieces that come above.
Yeah, this is harder to assess from the client end of things. A good client-centered lawyer will absolutely use technology, but they'll use it smartly, right? They're not just going to approach you as a tech wizard, and you probably want to run away from that. Because technology is not the first thing. You don't lead with it. You lead with your problem that you're trying to solve, and you hire technology to help you solve problems. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like using client relationship management software, using law practice management software, most firms are going to need that, and they're going to need to use it smartly. There's some interesting glitches there, though, right? Like, I was at one point, I decided I was going to, I think this was before deep work came out, but it was the same concept. Like, I wanted to block off focus time during my day. So I decided I was only going to return phone calls between 10 and 2. And so, an email, I think. And so if you called me, my voicemail said, I only return phone calls between 10 and 2. I'll get back to you at that time, which is awful, right? Like, what a horrible thing to say to somebody who has expressed interest in hiring me. And I feel like you get something similar when somebody is really using marketing automation, CRM software to send out automated emails, for example. If that's done poorly, it can feel really abusive, actually. To me, I don't know about, to me,
Yeah.
it feels abusive. Like
Well, it's abuse my inbox.
oh my God, I
Don't abuse
hate
my
that.
inbox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, or, I know in networking, often I'll realize that somebody, I bet this comes up in real estate circles, because I know like contactually is a big relationship. I think it's a popular CRM for real estate professionals. And one of the things it always prompts you to do is like, you haven't talked to this person in a while, send them a form email that just says like, hey, how are you? Or something like that. And I get those sometimes and I'm like, you don't actually care, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, the question of how are you is almost always a bad question.
Right. Like,
Because I was like, you're not like my mom.
yeah,
Like,
if you're a
how much
friend,
could you really care
yeah, if
about
you're a
how
friend
I'm
who I
doing?
think cares about me, fine. But
Yeah.
if you're like a business acquaintance, like, fuck you. So
Yeah.
I hate that stuff, but using
Yeah.
it really well
Yeah.
is good. Like I think a different thing that I did, which is helpful, is a lot. I represent people who'd been sued by debt collectors, and the debt collectors use a lot of forms. And so I had put together a form answer and discovery requests and things like that to help people take care of that, so they wouldn't default before they had a chance to hire me, basically. And when you signed up, I was very clear that I'm going to send you some follow-up emails to help you use these forms. And so like 35 days after this, I'd a few days after you downloaded it, I'd remind you to make sure that you got the thing served. And, after 35 days, I'd say, hey, you should have your responses to your discovery request by now. Here's how to think about that. And so like, it was almost an online course in how to respond to your lawsuit. And that's different. I feel like that was both respectful and helpful. And then there's a lot in between. So I think using stuff like that is really important, but using it well is way more important. You can get really impersonal and gross, or you can provide really amazing service. So,
Do you think that lawyers should be concerned or otherwise have like hesitancy in giving away too much of their knowledge? Or do you think that like that really a game that lawyers should play is give away all of the knowledge that you have on a particular subject matter to build the confidence and the rapport, and that people are going to hire you, or the people that are going to hire you, the people that won't, we're never going to hire you to begin with?
I have the way I think about this and the way I practiced, which is totally not necessarily how everybody needs to do it. I believe that doing law well is complex and difficult enough that when most people see it, what they need to do in order to get it done, they would rather hire a lawyer for help, right? Like this is my basement. We got this finished recently. I probably could have done all that work myself, but there's no way in hell I want to do that. Like, so you can,
Also
they're
to the
all,
level of quality that
well,
you would
and
expect.
maybe, like
Yeah.
I'm pretty handy, but like, but I don't wanna.
Yeah.
And I have found that the more I give away, the more I receive.
Yeah.
And people who want to do it themselves are going to do it themselves. And it doesn't matter if I give them the information or not. And people who don't want to do it themselves, it isn't about, do they have the information? If I can make it easier for them by having them hire me or use a tool that I've built, I mean, that's a thing that I think is underused in law, is like build a tool and then charge people to use it. Make it cheaper than hiring you, and then people will. But if you can, if somebody wants help doing it, then they will look for help doing it and they'll hire me. Especially if I offer options and tiers or things like that, so that they don't have to hire me for, my full ridiculous hourly rate at my maximum effort. So,
yeah. And when you see that, like the types of mediums that are more conducive for being able to share the information, what have you found is like one of the easiest ways for lawyers to communicate about like their subject matter expertise in a way that can make sense for clients? Is that like in podcasting, or typically in like traditional book writing or article writing?
I mean, I think there's a range, and honestly, it's one of those things where I think you need to know your client base. And this won't probably be a surprise to many of your listeners, to you, but one of the first exercises that we have people do is to put together like a client journey map. Who is your ideal client? What do they look like? What kinds of things are they interested in? Where might they live? Maybe even give them a car. But even more importantly, what kind of behaviors are they engaging in for the week year, months before they hire you. So you can figure out so you can get to know that person, or that category of people. And you have to be careful with this, obviously, that if you put too much detail on that person, then you put blinders on, and you start missing out on good clients. But then you think about that, who am I actually trying to market to? What am I trying to build for them? And then how would they like to encounter this information? So when it comes to podcasts, for example, am I a good host? Am I able to be interesting? Is there a subject matter that I think would be interesting to my ideal client? And is a podcast the way that they are likely to choose to consume that information? And you ask yourself the same thing about just about everything: Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, podcasts, YouTube, whatever. Sometimes YouTube is the answer, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes podcasts are fantastic, and sometimes they're not. Facebook works, but it doesn't work for everybody. Twitter works, but it doesn't work for everybody. Instagram is great for some, and it's not for others. If you're trying to represent creative professionals, you should be on Instagram. Maybe that goes for real estate professionals. I don't know, but it all comes down to really knowing your core demographic and how they want to consume information and what kinds of things they're interested in. The nature of the internet is that if you're not putting content on your website, you're probably going to be invisible, because no matter what people are doing, they're searching. But network building can happen just about anywhere. It just depends on where your clients are and where they want to be, where they want you to be, I guess.
Oh, that's awesome, Sam. Well, I think that runs for our time that we had booked you for today in there. I know you got a lot going on. So thank you so much for coming on the Real Estate Nerds podcast. I was wondering if anybody wants to reach out to you or otherwise connect with your community, what's the best way for them to do that?
Lawyerist.com. Go to the front page and check it out.
Awesome, guys. Well, go to thelawyerist.com. Check out the great work that Sam is doing there. I can tell you right now that the things that he is talking about here are absolutely fundamental, not just to the legal community. They're fundamental to every single entrepreneur that I've personally coached or that's come through the doors of Royal Legal Solutions, over the last 6 years for all these guys. One of the big things, too, that he has going on, too, if you're interested in that, is also his Facebook group, where it has a lot of the community that's built around there. Hey, guys, if you don't have a community, if you're not actively building a community, that's your big iceberg. Your iceberg is your community. It's where are you trying to get everybody together to continue to engage in that conversation. And that's your first place to incubate your ideas, start to sell your products and services, and really be able to find out what are the deep problems that you can look for people. So if you're looking at a good model, I've read Sam's book, I've looked at his website, I've looked at his Facebook group that he has going on there. It is fantastically lawyeristic. I've hit all of the key points that he should be hitting into it. In some ways, even a lot better than what we're doing at Royal Legal Solutions. So I've actually picked up a few tips and tricks from studying Sam. So thank you for that, Sam. And thank you for coming on the show and sharing with us today. And everybody go check out the lawyerist.com. So that's it, guys, for today. This is the Real Estate Nerds podcast. I hope you guys enjoy the show. If you like it, then make sure to drop a review into it. Check out the Tax, Legal, and Asset Protection Secrets for Real Estate Investors Facebook group. That's where I'm posting in any of the novel ideas that I'm working on. It's also the best place to be able to interact with any of our community for any questions that you have there. If you have anything that's particular to you that you want to be able to know about, like, hey, I'm checking out XYZ idea, and you want to be able to connect with my staff, we have live chat with actual live staff from Royal Legal Solutions through the website every single day. There's no obligation to do that, and we can actually direct you to this particular links of our website where we have all that information stored. It's a huge help for us to be able to know, hey, what's interesting to you guys? How can we provide more information about that? So reach out to us from the Facebook group. Reach out to us from the chat from the website, and we're always updating the website with all kinds of awesome information on that, guys. So I hope you enjoyed Real Estate Nerds podcast today episode, guys. Look forward to connecting with you soon. Take care.